Hello everyone and welcome back to Mrs. B History. I'm glad you're here for episode 1 of our Weimar and Nazi Germany series, and trust me, if you get this episode right, everything else in the course makes so much more sense. We're starting in November 1918. The First World War is ending, Germany's on its knees, and a Kaiser is about to lose his throne. During this video, you're going to understand exactly why, and you're going to be able to use that understanding to nail exam questions about Germany's instability all the way through to 1933. So let's go. Okay, so before we get to the abdication itself, you need to understand the state that Germany was in by 1918. And I want you to think about this in 3 categories: military, economic, and social, because those 3 words are going to come up again and again in your exam answers. Militarily, Germany was finished. The plan at the start of the war, the Schlieffen Plan, was supposed to knock France out quickly. It failed. Germany ended up fighting on 2 fronts, west against France and Britain, and east against Russia, for 4 exhausting years. And then in 1917, America joined the war on the Allied side. Fresh troops, fresh supplies, fresh money. Germany couldn't compete, and by the summer of 1918, the front line was collapsing. Economically, it was a disaster. Britain's naval blockade had been strangling Germany's imports throughout the war. Food, medicine, raw materials, all desperately short. By 1918, ordinary German civilians were surviving on around 1,000 calories a day. That's about half of what you need. The turnip winter of 1916 to 1917, where turnips, normally fed to animals, became a staple food for millions of people. And that tells you everything you need to know. And socially, Germany was fracturing. Workers were going on strike, soldiers were refusing orders. The country was angry, exhausted, and looking for someone to blame. So here's a quick revision tip: the 3 category approach. In the exam, if you're asked and explain why Germany was unstable in 1918 to 1919, don't just list events. Use these 3 categories: military, economic, and social, and link them together. For example, the military failure prolonged the war, which led to a blockade and food shortages, causing civilian fury, and therefore helped to lead to the political collapse. That chain of reasoning will push you into the top mark band. So now let's zoom in on the military situation, because the exam often asks you about the consequences of military failure. Germany's last gamble was the Spring Offensive in 1918, also called the Ludendorff Offensive. The idea was to hit the Western Front hard before American troops arrived in large numbers, and initially it worked. Germany made more territorial gains in days than had been achieved in years. But it burned out. Supply lines couldn't keep up, troops were exhausted, and then the Allies counterattacked in August 1918 with a vengeance. By this point, Germany's 2 top military commanders, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, told the Kaiser it was over. They recommended seeking an armistice. And here's the bit that really matters for your exam. They did this partly to protect the army's reputation. They wanted civilians and politicians to be the ones associated with surrender and not the military. That decision, blaming civilians for defeat, directly caused the stab in the back myth. We'll come back to that in a moment, because it's one of the most important concepts in this course. Now things move fast, and I mean really fast. Within 2 weeks, Germany went from an empire ruled by a Kaiser to a republic, and here's how it happened. It started with the Navy. On the 28th of October 1918, German naval commanders at Kiel ordered the fleet to sail out and fight the British in one final, honourable battle. The sailors refused. They mutinied. They had not survived 4 years of war to die in a pointless last stand, and the mutiny spread instantly. Sailors and workers began forming revolutionary councils, inspired by what they'd heard about the Russian Revolution of 1917, where workers had overthrown the Tsar and taken power. These councils started seizing control of cities, Kiel, Hamburg, Bremen. Within days it had spread inland, and by the 8th of November Munich had fallen to the revolution. By the 9th of November, Berlin itself was in chaos. This is what the historians call the November Revolution, and here's something really important to understand. It wasn't organised. It wasn't planned by a political party. It was a spontaneous explosion of anger from people who had simply had enough. That makes it different from the Russian Revolution, and it matters for how you explain what happened next. With revolutions sweeping the country, the political situation in Berlin became critical. The Social Democrats, Germany's largest political party, were desperately trying to manage the chaos. Their leader, Friedrich Ebert, knew that unless something decisive happened quickly, Germany could go the way of Russia, a full communist revolution. So the 9th of November 1918, the most important single day in Weimar Germany's history, three things happen, and you really should know all three. Firstly, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated. He was at his military headquarters in Spa, Belgium. His advisers told him that the army would no longer fight for him. The Social Democrats told him that unless he abdicated, they couldn't prevent a full communist revolution. And so he went. He fled to the Netherlands, where he would live out the rest of his life in comfortable exile, never returning to Germany. Over 400 years of dynasty rule ended just like that. Second, the German Republic is declared. A Social Democrat politician named Philipp Scheidemann appeared at a window of the Reichstag building and spontaneously announced that Germany was and now a republic. Why spontaneously? Because he'd just heard that the communists were about to announce a Soviet republic from a different building. He had to get there first. Germany became a republic almost by accident. Third, 2 days later, on the 11th of November on 1918 at 11 o'clock in the morning, the armistice was signed. The guns fell silent and the First World War was over. And Friedrich Ebert, now Chancellor of this brand new republic, is left holding the wreckage. A defeated country, a starving population, a revolution in the streets, and a democratic system that most Germans had never lived under before. Not a great start. So we're going to talk about three key figures. Firstly, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who we had on a previous slide. Now, he had been the German emperor since 1888, autocratic, impulsive, and often erratic. He led Germany into World War I and oversaw 4 years of catastrophic war. When it was over, he ran. His abdication left a massive power vacuum, and his flight looked to many Germans like abandonment. Friedrich Ebert, leader of the SDP, the Social Democratic Party, Germany's largest party, representing workers and trade unions. Now, Ebert was a moderate socialist. He believed in democracy, in working within the system, and not in revolution. When the Kaiser abdicated, Ebert became Chancellor and then the first president of the Weimar Republic. He was, by any measure, handed an almost impossible task, and you can see him on the slide before you. And then lastly, you have the SPD, or the Social Democratic Party. These were not communists, these were democratic socialists. They wanted reform through parliament, or their Reichstag, and not through revolution. That distinction matters enormously because it explains why Ebert later used the army to crush left-wing revolutionaries, which was a hugely controversial decision that created enemies on both left and right. Remember, if you need to talk about an individual in an exam answer, don't just name them, but do explain their significance. Ebert isn't just the first president, he's the man who had to build a democracy in a country that had never had one, in the middle of a revolution, whilst they were starving. Right, so now we're going to talk about a concept that is quite common when in a question about Weimar Germany, and that is the stab in the back myth, pronounced Dolchstosslegende. You don't need to spell it in the exam, but knowing the German terms shows examiners you know your stuff. And here's what it was. When the armistice was signed in November 1918, Germany's army was still on foreign soil. It hadn't been pushed back inside Germany's borders. Military commanders Hindenburg and Ludendorff had recommended seeking peace because they knew the military situation was hopeless. But they were very careful not to say that publicly. Instead, a narrative began to spread. Germany had not been defeated militarily. Germany had been stabbed in the back, betrayed at home by politicians, socialists, and Jews who had undermined the war effort from within. This was a lie. Germany had lost. The military knew it, but the myth was incredibly powerful because it gave people something to blame. The November criminals, as the politicians who signed the armistice were called. Ebert and the SPD were forever associated in the public mind with defeat and humiliation, even though they had inherited a situation that they didn't create. And this is why the stab in the back myth matters so much. It became the central piece of Nazi propaganda throughout the 1920s and the early 1930s. Hitler used it constantly. It was one of the key weapons he used to destroy people's faith in the Weimar Republic. The events of November 1918 didn't just end a war, they planted seeds that would grow into the destruction of German democracy 15 years later. You need to understand these three key consequences and be able to explain them as well as list them. Consequence 1. The Republic was born in defeat and crisis. The new German Republic was declared at the same time as the armistice. From day one, democracy in Germany was associated in many people's minds with military humiliation. The Kaiser's Germany had fought the war, and the Republic had surrendered it. That association, that democracy equals defeat, was toxic, and it never fully went away. Consequence 2. The stab in the back myth poisoned politics from the very beginning. Right-wing groups had a ready-made narrative to attack the Republic with. It made the Weimar government appear illegitimate in the eyes of millions of Germans, particularly on the political right. And consequence 3, the Ebert-Groener Pact stored up huge problems. Ebert secretly made a deal with General Groener of the army. The army would support the new government against left-wing revolution. But in return, the government would not reform or democratize the old military officer class. This meant the new democratic republic had a fundamentally anti-democratic army leadership at its heart. An army that would eventually support the undermining of democracy rather than defend it. Okay, so let's put this content to work on one of the questions that could be asked about this topic. Explain why Germany was unstable in the years 1918 to 23, and this would be a 12-mark question. Here's the structure that I would use. I would have 3 paragraphs, each with a clear point, specific evidence, explained, and link back to the question. So my first point would be about the legacy of World War I creating economic devastation and social unrest, which directly caused political instability. My evidence would be that the British naval blockade had reduced German civilians to around 1,000 calories a day by 1918. The turnip winter of 1916 to 17 showed the scale of civilian suffering. This left population angry and looking for someone to blame. This economic exhaustion made revolution possible in November 1918 and created a population that was receptive to extreme political parties who promised change, destabilizing the Republic from its very first day. My point 2 would be the stab in the back myth, which undermined the Weimar Republic's legitimacy from the moment it was created. Military commanders Hindenburg and Ludendorff had privately recommended the armistice but avoided public blame. Right-wing groups spread the false narrative that Germany had been betrayed by its politicians, socialists and Jews. This directly undermined faith in the Republic. Ebert's government was seen by millions as having surrendered Germany rather than inherited a lost war, making it vulnerable to challenges from both left and right between 1919 to 1923. And lastly, I would talk about the power vacuum created by the Kaiser's abdication, which left a new, inexperienced democratic government facing multiple crises simultaneously. The Republic was declared in November 1918, the same day as the armistice. Ebert's government immediately faced the Spartacist uprising, hyperinflation, and the French occupation of the Ruhr, all before and on 1923. A government with no tradition or democratic rule, no popular mandate, and no functioning economy was never going to be stable. The events of 1918 guaranteed that 1919 to 1923 would be a period of crisis. Remember to give 3 separate causes, and for the highest answers, link causes together. So before we look at the summary, the 6 key terms that you need to know are on the PowerPoint slides. If you want to stop it and make a note or screenshot it, they will be really useful in answering any exam question that you need to have on this period. So here are 3 things, and if you can explain all 3, then you're ready to answer a question on this topic. By 1918, Germany was broken across 3 dimensions: military defeat, economic collapse from the naval blockade causing mass starvation, and complete social breakdown. These 3 things working together made revolution inevitable. The November Revolution was spontaneous and not planned. It started with sailors' mutiny at Kiel in 1918 and swept across Germany within days. Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated at the start of November, and Germany was declared a republic the same day, almost by accident, to beat the communists to it. And the consequence of 1918, especially the stab in the back, poisoned German democracy before it even started. The republic was born associated with defeat. That is the key reason why it was so vulnerable to the challenges that came between 1919 and 1923 and the rise of extremism throughout the 1920s. So we've come to the end of episode 1. If you understood everything in that video, you've just built the foundation for the entire Weimar and Nazi Germany course. Everything we study from now on can connect back to what happened in November 1918. In episode 2, we're going to look at the Weimar Constitution itself, what it set up, why parts of it were genuinely impressive, and why other parts of it were going to cause serious problems down the line. We'll talk about proportional representation, Article 48, and why the design of the new democracy contained the seeds of its own destruction. If this video helped you, and I really hope it did, then please give it a like. It genuinely helps more students find these videos, and these videos exist for you. If there's something you're confused about, drop a line in the comments and I'll get back to you.